The Community Development Committee. We've got a public presentation. It's informational only. So number one, so it's the Dog Park Task Force recommendation. And Ian and Larry and myself will be presenting that. Come on up. All right, the Mission Dog Park Task Force was established in February of this year by Mayor Schoenberg to research, evaluate, and make recommendations to the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission regarding the feasibility and creation of off-leash dog park mission for our consideration. The task force was comprised of City Council members, Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission members, residents, and others who have ongoing interaction and contact with dog owners in our community. The task force was asked to develop a recommendation in the context of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, projects, and priorities. The task force met 6 times between February and June, and the meetings included a tour of 6 existing metropolitan area dog parks and presentations by 2 other cities currently operating dog parks. And those folks were from Leawood and Raytown, the 2 other cities that came in and did a presentation for us.
Lee Summit.
Oh, Lee Summit. Thank you. I'm sorry. Based on the information collected through the process, the task force presented the following findings. Whereas study and analysis of a dog park was a priority 1 recommendation included in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And whereas the Parks and Recreation leaders from communities with dog parks indicated they have had an overwhelmingly positive feedback from residents and visitors, and whereas research indicates that a dog park be a minimum of 1 acre, and whereas best practices recommend a dog park have adequate space to rest overused areas on a regular basis, and whereas all dog parks visited by the task force were built on donated land and or land that was not being used for any other recreational function or activity, and whereas the task force members believe there are opportunities for private funding and or sponsorship for construction and maintenance of an off-leash dog park. As such, the task force recommended to the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission to approve and forward to City Council that staff should move forward with the following. Number 1, create a Friends of the Mission Dog Park support group to explore private funding and sponsorships. Number 2, identify and analyze unused open space for conversion or creation of a dog park, including land acquisition and partnerships. Based on land identified, recommend use restrictions or limitations, develop preliminary construction cost estimates, develop ongoing operation and maintenance costs, including staff, consider and recommend other dog amenities the city should offer. So at that point, after the task force was done, Ann and I went to the Tree, Recreation, and Parks Commission, and we gathered all this information and presented it to them. And at that point, they held a couple of meetings, and go ahead and interrupt me anytime you have something to add.
We had a conversation after it was presented, and we encouraged the members of the Park, Recreation, and Tree Commission to go out and talk with neighbors, mull it over in their head, consider what we had gone through as a task force and what their recommendations were. So we came back after a month and had a discussion ourselves as a roundtable, and we literally just went around the table and let everyone speak with what their experiences were and how they analyzed this information. And then we basically put that information from those conversations together to come up with the recommendation from that commission.
All right, so therefore the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission recommends, number 1, that the city staff create a Friends of the Mission Dog Park support group to explore and secure private funding and or sponsorships for the development of a dog park. Part of that is the Friends group should include members from the city's Park and Recreation Department, Public Works Department, Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission. Number 2, the city maintain that current dedicated funding for parks and recreation not be used for the establishment of a dog park, but to improve existing facilities. Number 3, the Friends Group identify and analyze unused open space for conversion or creation of a dog park. Number 4, based on any land that may be identified, the Friends Group recommend use, restriction, or limitations. Number 5, the Friends Group develop preliminary construction cost estimates based on the land identified. Number 6, the Friends Group develop ongoing operations and maintenance costs, including staffing. And number 7, consider and recommend other dog-friendly amenities the city could provide for/offer our residents. Does anybody have any questions?
How much is that cost us?
Well, go ahead.
When we listened to Leewood and, the other city, thank you, Lee Summit. I don't know why Lee Summit's not sticking tonight, but it isn't. There it is. We toured multiple cities. We also went out to Grandview and Overland Park as well when we looked at dog parks. When those two cities came and talked to us, they said their startup costs tend to run around $300,000. And that it takes between $2,000 and $8,000 in each park just on the doggy bags that they provide for those kind of things. You're going to look at daily maintenance, somebody that's opening and closing gates every day. You're going to look at who's going to be the person to call if someone needs help at that park and that kind of stuff. So there isn't a specific number. We got some generalizations from some of these other cities.
I took some notes on some of that stuff because I was on the task force. First off, I would like to say that I would like to consider some alterations to the recommendation. Get back to that after answering Tom's question here. We looked at the setup and cost of some of those parks, and Leewood was a really good example. They took some existing land that was kind of open field. There was an office park going in, and they worked with the owners of the office park to be able to use that land and consider that part of the park space that they required with the office building. There was about a $200,000, or just over $200,000 initial cost, but about $120,000 of that was to add a parking lot and the path around it and ADA accessibility. And then there was also some cost for clearing out some of the land, adding plumbing to it to be able to put some water there. But the vast majority, about 60% of it, was parking lot, ADA accessibility, and the path around it.
And that's another thing we'd like the Friends Group to go ahead and maybe look at is securing, funding from grants to go ahead and get some of that.
I think what we do need to consider, and I was on the task force, and I know I wasn't the only one on the task force of this opinion. I think we need to consider looking at existing parkland too that can be converted. There are parks in this city that are accessible, that we might have some good opportunity to be able to convert over, to get a lot more utilization out of. It can still be enjoyed by anybody who might want to walk around there today. We might be able to save some money that way, and I think that really should be a consideration for the Friends of the Dog Park group. And if it's not, I think we're doing a disservice. I don't really know why we wouldn't want to consider that.
One thing that you all need to realize is both the city of Lee Summit and the city of Leewood, which are larger cities than we are, use donated land. Their dog parks are on lands that were given to them by the Hall family. Their dog parks are lands that were given to them by an industrial business, because there was a piece of land that they couldn't use for anything else. It had a gully running through the middle of it. So that is something that was really interesting about what we considered. And so when you talk about a startup fee, this isn't talking about land. This is just what it takes to turn usable land into a dog park.
Well, in both of the cases that we heard about, that was land that was basically unusable at that point. There were drainage issues, there was a lot of tree clearing and other stuff they had to do it. In both the Lee Summit and Leewood cases, they had to add parking lots, which was by far the biggest expense of setting this up. And both Parks and Rec directors from those cities talked about that. I would love to also consider looking at, if there is some land out there. Tom, I don't know how big your backyard is, but I don't know that you use all of it.
Listen, I never had a dog in my life. My children, I didn't let them have dogs. I didn't like their spit, their excrement, their smells, their hair, or anything. I took care of a lot of dog bites to kids, and I wrote a paper about it many years ago, very important. I don't think anybody read it. In the last 6 months, my son got a dog. He doesn't live with us. And he's had to have that dog in my house a lot. And I was unsympathetic to you a year ago. That dog, I love that dog. And so I am sympathetic to you now, and I'd like to take that dog to some park.
And it's something that I think would really benefit the community. I know the direct quote, because I have it written down here, from Parks and Rec director at Leawood, he said that when they've had the dog park, this is the most appreciated amenity they've added to the city since he's been around. And I think he said he's been there 17 years. So to hear feedback like that, I really do think that this is something that the residents of this community would really get a lot of use out of it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at, if there's land that we might be able to acquire. I just would also like to consider what it might cost and what the impacts might be of converting existing parkland as well.
I'd like to interject something here, just for a matter of clarification, because we are recorded and this will go in the minutes and we don't know who else might. But neither one of the representatives from the other cities were Parks and Recreation directors.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought he was the Parks and Rec director.
Yeah, neither one of them were. They were just Parks and Recreation representatives. Sorry. Yeah. So just clarification.
And I think,
Thank you, Christy.
one other thing you need to add to this conversation is our own city's park master plan and what it said about our city and how we are currently underserved in parks right now. And that is where the Park Recreation and Tree Board Commission is basing some of their decision on, is the fact that when you look at the acreage per person, we are short. And so it's very precious to us, and that's where that comes from.
Actually, I did some more digging on that. If you look at the acreage per person in the city, we are absolutely short. But if you look at a typical regional area that they base some of those numbers on, we're really not. We're right about on par with a lot of other places our size. I can dig some more information up on that, but I did some more digging there. And I will say this was a level 1 priority also as a part of the Parks Recreation Master Plan. This isn't like a, hey, we would like to maybe take this on later. This was also one of the level 1 priorities.
Can you state what the actual priority is, though? Do you remember what the priority is?
I don't have the plan.
It's for the study and analysis.
It's to study it, which is what we're doing.
Sure.
So.
I just wouldn't want to move forward and exclude the idea of converting some existing parkland. I think that should be something that's an option on the table, and I think at least I would appreciate on the council if we are going to have something that we're going to take action on, that we get some scenarios of, if we did this, here's what it might cost, and here's some of the possible benefits or what we might lose by doing that.
And I feel like that's where that
2 or 3 different scenarios on that. If we just limit it to going and acquiring land, I don't know where this is ever going to go. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, thanks, Nick. But one of the, again, the outline of the Friends of the Mission Dog Park is to kind of go ahead. It doesn't talk specifically about looking at current, parks that we have in Mission right now, but it does talk about, the costs, looking for other private funding, converting existing land that Mission already owns. That's not being used for anything else and unlikely to be developed in the future, perhaps. I know that Johnson County has provided, if you want to talk a bit about the maps for that from the AIMS, the county AIMS program.
We did request a map from the county, which we got about a week ago, and asked them to just map for us all of the city-owned, currently city-owned properties, so we can kind of see that and where we have opportunities and why we acquired certain pieces that we did. Some of them are potentially for future road projects and that sort of thing, but that's certainly something that could be shared with the Friends of the Dog Park group as we work through looking at and analyzing areas of the city that might make sense.
Have other cities
requested grant money? Have they gotten grant money for dog parks? Do you know the other cities?
I know with Leewood and Lee's Summit that we talked to, they did not. But I also know that through the NLC group that I'm a part of, I have access to a grant finder tool, and there are a number of dog park specific grants that are out there. Doesn't mean we automatically get one, but there are grant funds out there that we could go after. So.
And I think there's some evidence that would suggest other communities that have used these friends groups that are pursuing the sponsorships very successfully. I think even in Ottawa, there was an article in the League's publication a year and a half ago that talked about a group in Ottawa that formed for the creation of looking at a dog park.
Oh, another point to mention too, I think is cool to bring up. At Lee's Summit, they were able to work with some private sponsorships. And they actually have 2 different off-leash dog parks, and one of them was about $4,200 a year maintenance cost. The other one they estimated, I think it was about $4,600. I have the numbers in here somewhere. But they have 2 different partners that pay $5,000 a year to sponsor those. So they're actually not losing any money on the maintenance costs on those, and able to use it to kind of maintain some other stuff. So
Those were a one-year thing though, and so they are soliciting from the public they've got little plaques they put up in their park and to help defray some of the costs.
sure, I guess I'm just bringing it up because there is a good opportunity, I think, to partner with some of the private entities around, or some of the businesses to look at sponsorship opportunities. So.
And I think that's why, in both of the committees that I was experiencing, they emphasized this friends group because it's going to take an ongoing commitment not only to maintain these parks, but to see how this park is going to fit into the city plans. And just to show the interest that, yes, this city is interested in dogs and what can we do for dog owners. And it may go beyond just having a dog park. What else can we do within the city to make it a dog-friendly place?
It would be helpful for me, and I've been on for quite a while, to understand we have 2 elements to this. There's a what, and what is a dog park. And the next element is the how. And I don't think we get to the how until we determine that people's interest in the what. So turning it over, if we turn it over to the friends, who then would they report to? What's the timeline for them coming up with recommendations? I mean, I've heard people around the community that are really dog people. I have a 210-foot backyard, so my dogs have full reign. But some people don't have that option. I mean, a lot of people who are building more apartments that have dogs that need that option. So I'm kind of trying to gauge, we've got the what, but how would we be able to we give it to another group, but get a broader idea of how many people really would like to see a dog. Because I think the how can happen if you determine that the what is important enough. We've done that on other issues. So what's a revenue or a venue, if you will, for getting the word out have you done any more research on how many people?
I can only talk anecdotally, and when I was running for office and when I had some Facebook posts, I would get about a 4 or 5 to 1 response rate on the stuff that I post related to the dog park versus anything else, including Gateway, including...
And they live in Mission, right?
These are people that live in Mission. These were posts that were specifically around people that live in Mission. So. I also know that in the past, some residents have written letters, this was before I was elected, just highlighting the fact that we're, I think, about 7.5 miles away from the nearest dog park, kind of listing all the pet-friendly businesses and just how much of a pet-friendly community we want. I absolutely think the desire for it is there, but I think it's also something we should go out there and maybe try to quantify a little bit.
Yeah, and I think you could
talk anecdotally.
Yeah, I think you could do that. I think we could do that through some surveying tools. I mean, I think you can talk to people about how frequently they would use it. I think and is that based on how close it would be or how convenient or accessible it would be to where they live? Or, that they want to walk to a dog park? Do they want to drive to a dog park? I think there's a whole series of questions that you could get at through a statistically valid survey that we could develop. You could look at some public forums and sort of collect similar information. I think there's a lot of ways. I think the challenge then is, and we talk about this a lot, whether it's streets or parks or stormwater or whatever that is, when you look at it in a vacuum, it's a different, people may say, absolutely, I would support that, but when compared against, the other competing priorities, where does that fall? So I think we have to put, grow a little bit more legs on this whole concept of the what and where it might be, and then we can start, I think, asking those questions about. But if you would like to set a specific timeline.
I just don't want it to fall off the plate.
Sure.
I mean, I think they worked really hard to come up with some concepts, and I just kind of like to know what the next step would be. If it got turned over to the Friends group, how long is that? And then how long would they work on it? And what other things will they be drawing? I do really well with logic and facts and things pulled together, so.
The other thing we have to think about, and we talked about this at the task force, is on the amount of land that we have available to us, whatever we would land on, no pun intended, then how many people can that really serve? And so then what kind of restrictions are we going to have that are included in this? Is it going to have to be mission residents only because of the space that you have and the use that it will get? And then if it is mission residents only, is it a restricted number of mission residents? And is it, something that's accessible only through a prox card? So, we're trying to look at it from every scenario. I think you're right. It's what is a dog park, and that's what we've got to determine is what can a dog park in Mission look like. And we can't answer any of those other questions until we know what it looks like. Is it an acre big? Is it 2 acres big? Does it have agility equipment or doesn't it? Does it have a trail inside or not? Do we already have a parking lot? So again, yeah, I think you're right, and that's what what I would call an official Friends group, which would be the organization that would be responsible for helping to put together grant applications and going out and soliciting sponsorships and donations and things like that. But let them kind of try to, identify what is the location. And so, like we say, until we know how big, we aren't going to be able to figure anything else out.
Well, who mentioned the 1 acre tract? What was that? Was that from Leewood?
That's just a minimum.
So you have, okay, well, there's a requirement. It has to be an acre.
Yeah, and I think Lee Wolf was, if I remember right, around 7 or 8 acres, they said. I think the ones in Lee Summit were a little smaller, maybe in the 4 acre range, if I'm not mistaken.
And
I think a 1 acre dog park is going to really get overrun.
Yeah, I do too. But I think they just opened one downtown, didn't they, Nick? I'm not even sure if it's
1.4, I think.
1.4.
Yeah, but it would require different servicing and different managing and that kind of stuff. I think the role of the Friends is, because there isn't a simple answer to this, because it does tie into, does the city want to build trails? Does the city need to improve sewers? Does the city need to do this? That we have a team of people then that is going to be advocating for it and thinking about it and communicating with City Council about it so that it does become a piece of the conversation. Because I don't think there's anybody that said this is a bad idea. But I do think there are people that say it needs more conversation and it needs time to develop. It's not something that we can do this week.
And I think that we would probably start to get people that want to be on this task force, maybe put it through the Mission magazine and the bulletin board or something to that effect. And then that group would be working with the staff group, or would they be working primarily with Park and Rec Commission board?
I think staff.
Okay. So that would be kind of where I think the genesis of it would start.
And we could certainly set something out there that would say, for example, if we put the notice out, you might give them until February or March. That, I think you would set a first date to maybe bring a report back to the Community Development Committee. So you could set that, kind of first date to report back and see how far they were, and then I think you kind of build your plan, or you may be closer to building a plan around that. But that would give them time to sort of form, and I think.
Is it even an option, Suzie, to have something in the magazine where we dedicate, one page is dedicated to dogs or whatever, and we do a little survey and ask people what their general perception of
You
the
could do
dog
that in the
park
city's
is?
newsletter.
Yeah, we could do that on the website.
Well, you could do in the city's part of the newsletter.
Okay.
Right.
I think it's also important with this group to, and I know that there are a lot of budget concerns that we have to take into account with all this. I would prefer if the group doesn't have to worry about what those budget implications are so much, and just give us some options, give us some scenarios. What would it take to make this happen? Option A, option B, option C. We acquire land, we convert some existing land, we get lucky and get some land donated to us. Here's what our setup costs might be, here's what our maintenance costs might be. But I would hate to see them not consider options because they're worried that it's going to have too much of a budget impact. It's on us to decide some of the budgeting stuff.
Right, and Nick, if you go ahead and, those goals of the Friends of the Park, they discuss all those things, and they don't talk about, having to consider.
I just know it came up a lot during the dog park task force meeting. Some of those conversations were had. And I hope that the Friends of the Dog Park, if they're going to move forward with that, let's work on getting some recommendations on what it would take. And what
Right, and that's how the goals are written right now, is to go ahead and find out what those construction costs would be, and including land acquisition, if that's the way we decide to go, or not we, but.
Help me understand. I mean, is the city council set up that you can have ideas ping-ponged off of you all the time?
Sure.
I mean, is that what you guys expect? That we're gonna, the Friends are gonna come with plan A and you decide yes or no, and then next month they're gonna come up with plan B? Is that?
Well, we have representatives, that's why we have.
A, B, and C.
all at the same time?
Yeah, consider those.
See some options and let us, evaluate that and
Okay.
see what we think would work, or maybe none of them work, and we keep going back to the drawing board then. But without having some of those concrete numbers, I think it's really hard to make decisions on that. Right?
Well, we've been talking about this for how long, Christy?
Long time.
Yeah. So it's good that it's coming to fruition.
Interesting.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm Salt Lake, Florida, and I was on the dog park advisory too. And just one thing I wanted to point out related to what seems like kind of the theme of keeping options open is that the Parks and Recreation and Tree Board Commission set recommendation is not to consider any existing parks funds. And so I just wanted to flag that for everyone. On moving forward, if you want that, like Nick is saying, different sites to still be on the table, if you want different funding options to also be on the table, or to close them off at this point.
Say that again, I didn't follow that.
Part of the recommendation coming out of the PRT Commission was not to consider the use of any existing parks money.
That's what I was
And so
ask you when you got here.
yeah, so that's in the resolution as written, is
Yes,
my
that's correct.
understanding. And so I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, cool.
Did you have a question, Marcy?
I don't have a question. I mean, I just have kind of a small comment thing. I would like to see our existing land and parks reviewed, or even just discussed early in that, and not impact the funding, but I'd like to know in our A, B, and C presentations, I'd like to see that. I think that,
Like to see what?
like our existing land and parks, kind of
The current
in the,
uses
yeah,
and
So
what it would
Potential
take to.
consideration for converting existing parkland to potentially become an off-leash dog park, instead of just only considering acquiring new land.
Sure, absolutely.
And the master parks plan does have, I think if I am understanding your question, what kind of amenities are in each park and how big each park, I believe that all that information is in the master plan, and I believe we did put that out on the city website.
Do we have any kind of park utilization data, like just traffic counts or just any?
We have not just sat in a park and counted the number of people that have walked in and out. That's
Sure.
definitely something that can be done. You just need to find the resources to do it.
I can see a park.
And it is something that cities do. But we do have, how many times has this shelter been rented? How many times has this field been rented? Those type of.
Is there any kind of report overview that we could look at for that, or over the last year, over the last 6 months, here's what we've seen, number of times some things have been rented out, or number of times the field has been reserved and paid for?
Absolutely. You tell me the time frame you want that for, and I can get it for you.
I think that needs to come along with the recommendations. What's the park being used for now?
And another thing you need to add to that is the map that is in the master plan that shows the 1.5 mile radius for each park and what neighborhood would be affected by a park if you changed its usage, and how we have neighborhoods, even when you consider, big roads like Johnson Drive or Shawinigan Parkway, that prohibit children from going from one park to another and stuff like that, or even Lamar for that matter. So you need to look at those park usage maps as well, just where it's located in the neighborhoods and who gets to use that park, and if it shifts usage, what is that going to affect? Are you taking out the city's only baseball field? Are you taking out the city's only tennis court? And those are the questions you need to ask as well.
I think that's important because we need to know, Christy, if there's soccer teams playing up there constantly in ballpark, ball games, because I know a lot of the parks are really full with soccer.
Yeah, so if there's some way we can see usage data on that, maybe even when it's paid versus not paid, I think that might be interesting to see.
We make everything pay more. Well, we're getting, this time next year, everybody will pay you, so.
So this is a tough thing to balance with the city priorities when you think about the other things that residents want, like trails and basketball courts and all this kind of other stuff. And I don't know, my area of expertise is the parks, and so I have no idea what other city demands you guys are dealing with as well that you need to keep this balance with. And that's why I think the Park Recreation and Tree Board wanted some kind of organization to be able to communicate with the city, to keep the process fluid, because this is just such a complicated task to accomplish.
So how will you get the Friends of the Mission Dog Park? Are you going to just advertise for people to send in a resume, or are you going to?
I don't know that anyone has set any one way to do that right now.
I think a good thing to do will be to look at other organizations. I know like Police Summit does have a Friends of the Dog Park, and kind of get some direction from them on how they've had it set up. But I can't help but believe there'll be certain people that we will ask specifically.
I think it might be worth considering some of the local businesses that might be interested in being involved in something like that too. If we're going to solicit some private sponsorship involving the business community with some of that, would be pretty beneficial.
Absolutely.
Perfect idea.
And we did try to do that for the task force, and we didn't have any luck. But we might have more luck kind of with this group.
Because if you had some of the local vets and pet places weigh in on some of, we've had experience with this, or we've heard that somebody else tried this, to me, that would be a really good advocate for letting you know what's worked and what hasn't, or what they would recommend too.
Right.
Can you try to get some of those on your committee, right?
For the task force, yes.
I don't mind. I would be happy to go talk to Dr. G, if you want me to.
Thank you for your work on the task
Yes,
force.
very good.
All right, thank you. All right, well, I guess that concludes this public presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, so now moving on to action items, a resolution in support of a dog park task force recommendation.
Yeah.
There
Yes,
she is.
just following up on the discussion that we just had. You do have the resolution before you, and I believe you've had an opportunity to read it, but I would like to put out there for your consideration. The resolution is presented. I'm not going to read that, if that's okay.
Well, I think as we previously discussed, I would like to see it updated to also include in section 1, identify also potential existing parkland conversion and what the impacts of that might be. So not just looking at going and acquiring land, but considering as well what current park land or space we have that could potentially be used and what impacts that might have.
I don't see any harm in it.
So if you're interested in that, I would suggest we just take out the word unused. So just leave B as is. So identify and analyze open space for conversion to or creation of a dog park. So it doesn't really exclude any existing open space out there.
So you would just get rid of that word
Unused.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
I think I was watching heads too.
Yeah.
The other thing is, do you want to add, I mean, a couple of things, and I know, and I think understand the section 2 about the current dedicated park funding, I think that all comes back into play as a part of the process with the priorities out of the master plan. I think when we set up the goals and objectives of the dog park task force, we talked about, taking this recommendation in the context of the other things that we, wanted to accomplish. So I know that was something that you were talking about as well. And then I think if you wanted to, we could add a section that also said the Friends, sort of setting that first report back, and that a preliminary report would be returned to the council by March of 2018, so that as the group forms, they know they sort of have a first milestone to be working toward. So we can add that as a section 3.
Okay, that sounds good. Does anybody want to recommend that?
Put it on the council, but not on the consent. I think that'll be talked about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And Laura, can you just get confirmation back again or clarification on what you said about section 2? Do we need to change that to read a different way?
I didn't hear anybody up here say changing section 2.
Okay.
Adding section 3.
Preliminary report due back March 1st. Wonderful.
All right, thank you very much.
That's great. That's very exciting, and I know, look forward to moving forward with that. And I think we'll have an easier time getting people to serve on a Friends of the Dog Park than on a dog park task force.
I like T-shirt's name, Lee Wolf.
Lee Wolf,
I
yes.
thought that was really cool.
That is
I think
good.
we need to come up with a really cool name.
Well, if you looked at some of the names,
I
like
know.
some of the other ones, they were pretty
But I like
clever.
I just thought Lee Wolf
Happy
was
tables. I know.
That was just kind of cool.
Yeah, well, then we put the dog park on a bark week.
Hey!
Oh,
my God. All right.
Moving right along.
All right, the next item we have is adopt a park program. Again, Ms. Christy.
Yeah, this is another wonderful Parks and Recreation program that we have coming down the pipe, and we had been approached, we, staff, some other Parks, Recreation, and Tree, and do just let me say that I love the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission, especially when we call it the PRT Commission. So, yeah. PRT. But anyway, of course, kind of piggybacking on going through the Parks Master Plan and seeing the need to improve the appearances of our park and the cleanliness and everything else that goes along with it, knowing that those things are going to come along as we roll out that master plan. We wanted to introduce an Adopt a Park program which would allow community businesses, civic organizations, individuals that could adopt a park for a year at a time. And this would be all the parks that we have listed here, all 8 of our parks, as well as the trail system, and they would be responsible for going out either monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, and picking up trash, maybe raking, safety surfacing under the playground equipment, under the swings, doing some mulching, reporting whether there's any graffiti that needs to be taken care of, maybe even doing some painting on that graffiti, but just getting some ownership and some buy-in to our parks so that I know that we're stretched really thin staff-wise. They do the absolute best they can, but if we could get a little bit more community buy-in to our parks through this Adopt a Park program, I think that would be a win-win for everybody.
Good idea.
So we did have the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission discuss this. They broke into a subcommittee, a subcommittee of 3 people. Melissa Curry, Nate Dormer, David Schwank, put the initial draft or framework of the Adopt a Park program together. We took it back to the Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission for their review and approval, and this is the final product that they've come up with. And so we're just looking for some approval on that so we can roll this out to the community. Rolling that out, of course, we will look at posting it hopefully on the bulletin board in the Mission Magazine. I'll do an article in it, in the newsletter, our Facebook page, put the templates together, that kind of thing. but I just,
We're
again, I
gonna
think
start
it is a...
charging the city for all these bulletin board items.
Hey,
Just kidding.
charges for everything. Anyway, be more than happy to answer any questions on the Adopt a Park program.
We do have space in the upcoming magazine for one more thing, if you want to put it in right now.
This current one?
Adopt a tree. I mean, adopt a park.
Absolutely.
But I need.
On the bulletin board?
He sent it to me today, and we've got space for one more thing, and I know you were talking about putting something on there, so.
Yeah, I didn't know what the preference is. We can either do this or Friends of the Dog Park. We've got both of them as articles in the city newsletter, but hitting it in two different places doesn't hurt.
The bulletin board hits
Right.
people. So if you want to put the Adopt a Park on there, could I have it by Friday?
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Again, I make recommended,
Okay. Consent or no?
but no consent.
Okay.
All right, next up is the 2017 Mill and Overlay Program. John Belger.
Good evening, everyone. Just some highlights on the Mill and Overlay Program for this year. On July 27th, we received 6 bids for the program, with the lowest and most responsible bid being Little Joe's Asphalt for $270,201.33. This year's program will mill and overlay approximately 1.15 lane miles worth of road, replace 3,500 feet of curb and about 2,300 square feet of sidewalk. Also included in this year's program are some miscellaneous items that we lumped into this program to kind of get your benefit scale. There's a ramp repair at 53rd and Horton, the crosswalk improvements over at 61st and Broadmoor next to the Wellstone, the intersection of Johnson Drive and Broadmoor, those 2 westbound lanes to get mill and overlaid, and ADA ramps along Roland Drive per a request from a resident on Rock Creek Lane. This year's program is higher than past years, and the driver of that is twofold. One is these miscellaneous programs that we've included. The other is the streets that we have on the list for this year include a lot of curb and sidewalk work, so that flat work drove that cost up. A couple items were shuffled around from this year's program. The first was 49th Street right off of Lamar. With a pending stormwater issue there, we didn't feel like milling and overlaying that street just to come back and potentially tear it up in a year or two would be a very good idea. So we shifted 50th Street into the program when we shifted 49th Street out. Another change that we made is there was a portion of 55th Street that was removed from the program for this year. It included about 2.5 blocks worth of mill and overlay, and we thought that just in our findings along that stretch that all needs to be included in one big project in that stretch. I think there's going to be some changes through there, and we didn't want to build a portion of that project that may or may not match what potentially could be coming in the future. Little Joe's Asphalt has performed our mill and overlay for the last 2 years. They've done a great job both years. I would be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Were there any surprises on those bids?
No. Actually came in a little bit below our estimates. Removing that section of 55th Street drove that cost down initially, and even the low bid was actually below what we estimated too. So good prices, good bids, I think.
Do you have a map, John? Could you get what streets are on them? I
I
didn't see it in here. Or
We
is
can
it
have,
on the west side?
not yet,
Okay.
but we can get you a map.
All right, thank you.
With all the shuffling around, we need to make sure that our map's updated before we get that published.
Can you remind me on your street inventory when we're scheduled to do Broadmoor from Johnson Drive to Markway?
2019. It is.
It is.
Just to touch on that project a little bit, we had originally started design on that project in 2012. we got about halfway through the design, and then that project kind of got put up on the shelf. Earlier this year, we spoke to the folks out of Johnson County and actually got that section of road designated as a cars route. So,
So 2019 cars money, is that what we're using?
yes.
So we have to listen to Johnny for the next year on that.
So next year, in 2018, we will be finishing up the designs on that stretch and construction in 2019.
Okay, I went down and bought a $307 million Powerball ticket. I think that's what it is. Okay, so if I win, I get to pick the streets that I want fixed.
Why don't you just give us money to do all
You bet.
We
We'll take that offer any day.
I did happy to. I thought, okay, I told the lady down my guess what? I said, I'm fixing the streets if I win.
If I win, I will fix the streets too, but you all may not never see me again. I will be in.
You'll hire the contractor and.
I will be off the
You
grid
won't see
somewhere.
me either, if I get to pick what I want, right?
Sure.
Okay, I
Thank
think
you.
it's sample.
Non-consent, or consent?
I think it's that one. Sorry, I meant to.
All right, thank you, John. All right, the next item we have up is Kennett Place Streets, maintenance agreement and release. Larissa?
Thank you. So since 2014, we've been in conversation with the homeowners association at Kennett Place about repairs and resurfacing of their streets. There in the early 90s, the city council, the mayor and city council had approved some maintenance, and then we also believe that we were doing some maintenance in about the 2004-2005 timeframe. We were looking at those streets, and in 2016, the city council approved a chip seal program to take place on those streets. We later determined that the equipment was too large to fit through their entrance gates, so chip seal wasn't an option. And so we had been working with the HOA looking at some other seal treatment options. We had done, you may recall, we had added the Kennett Place streets to our core sampling program to try to determine what treatment might be suitable for those in the long term, and the core sampling would suggest that they may not be suitable for a mill and overlay. There could be some problems. And so we were willing to contribute about $10,000 towards a chip seal treatment. We were looking at an agreement and release document. The Homes Association has talked to some other contractors who feel that they might be able, they aren't as concerned about that core sampling data. So our goal was to try to create an agreement and release document that would commit those funds to the Kennett Place Homes Association, but release the city from any obligation if their contractor got in there and found something unexpected, if you will. So we had hoped, we originally had drafted an agreement that kind of memorialized the 2016 deal and had talked about looking at something or continuing the conversation for future responsibilities. As we found as we negotiated that, we were slowing down and perhaps limiting the HOA's ability to get the work done yet this season. So we kind of separated those two, and so what's included in your packet this evening is just the agreement and release to capture the 2016 commitment for your consideration. You may recall that it's structured in such a way that they would actually upfront the funds for the resurfacing and then submit for reimbursement, so that I know that was one of the council's considerations, that you wanted to ensure that the funds were actually spent on the street maintenance. So would ask for your consideration of that agreement, and then we'll continue our conversations with the ongoing maintenance responsibilities and obligations.
Take it to council. But I don't think it should be on consent. I think that needs to be discussed.
Okay.
Non-consent items. All right, thank you very much. Contract for Gateway Plan Inspections, Brian Scott.
Thank you. You've heard recently from Mr. Valente. He's anxiously ready to get started on the project, and he's expressed to staff that they would like to begin phase 1 of the Gateway project as early as this fall, October, November. And so we call that phase 1. It's just the apartments with the ground floor retail and the associated parking with that. So with that, staff is kind of gearing up and getting ready to identify the resources that we need in order to make the project successful. And one of those resources is plan review and inspection services. For a long time, we had a relationship with Johnson County. They provided plan review, inspection services to the city. Due to kind of a change in their staffing and some projects they had going on, they told us back in the fall of last year that they'd be canceling that agreement effective January 1 of 2017. We've been using a non-for-profit organization called IBTS, International Building Technology Institute Services, I believe. We've been having pretty good luck with that group overall for the smaller projects, kind of the day-to-day stuff. But really for a project this magnitude, we felt that we needed to have somebody with specialized services. So with that in mind, we developed an RFP. We put that out in the street in July. We sent that to a number of architectural firms, construction firms, as well as consulting firms that specialize in plan review and inspection services. We received 3 proposals back. We interviewed 2 firms that are consultants that specialize strictly in plan review, building inspections, structural engineering, of that sort. The firm that we've been kind of talking further with is a group out of Overland Park called FSC Incorporated. And they are consulting engineers. They have a staff that does mechanical, plumbing, electrical engineering, structural engineering. They also have a certified building official on their staff. They have a plan reviewer. And then they have a gentleman who's a structural engineer that used to be a plan reviewer for Kansas City. He's quite a bit of experience working with consultants as well as cities and plan review processes. So we've been talking with them. They came in and looked at the plans that were submitted for phase 1. They gave us kind of a scope of magnitude, if you will, of about $204,000, $209,000, I believe. And then there's some additional meetings associated with that. But they're going to be billing us on an hourly basis. So that's kind of how we're going to hold them to the hours they actually work and the rates that they're being billed for those hours.
That was their estimate on phase 1.
This phase 1, correct. And so the key to all of this is that it's really, we're going to work with the developer in negotiating that development agreement, that they're going to reimburse us for those costs. So, yeah. Let's get into that. So, we do collect plan review inspection service fees when we issue the permit, but we're going to work with the developer negotiating that development agreement where all of our costs are covered. In addition, kind of previous iterations of this project, we had an agreement with a company called Conrath, which served as something, for lack of a better term, kind of owner's rep on the project. They were an organization that was there to kind of protect our interest, managing the project, managing all the different components of the project, our engineers as well as the developers' engineers and contractors and so forth. That was a much larger project, a little more detailed than what this is. So kind of reevaluating that for this particular project, we thought about just kind of scaling that back and utilizing this firm to do some of that kind of eyes and ears on the project, if you will. So not only are they doing plan review, inspection services, but they're bringing to our attention any issues that may come up. They're making sure that the right materials are being used, that the project construction process is being followed, and that the right ways of construction are being utilized. We will be initiating a conversation with George Butler Association, GBA, who's our on-call consultant for engineering services, to have them provide kind of the same level of services that this group is providing on the civil engineering side. So they'll be looking at any kind of street work that's done associated with this project, storm sewer, water, sanitary sewer, anything like that. That's not as critical time-wise. We'll be a little bit further down the road before we initiate them. We have a meeting set in a couple of weeks to start that conversation with them. We hope to bring back a similar proposal in the very near future with them. consideration. So tonight we had asked that you consider the agreement and then authorize the mayor to sign each agreement with them. We're still fine tuning the actual contract. We should have that completed in your packet Friday for next week's meeting.
And would they be running a lot of hours of looking at the plans before we even get this development going? In other words, is there a chance that we can spend a lot of money on this, and then if something happens, the town will go through the development, and we're just out the money, because obviously.
No, we'll start, so the previous development
Yeah.
agreement waived, as a term of the development agreement, waived the building plan review or typical permitting fees. And those were recovered. I think the action item included, it was about a little over $1.3 million between the Conrath contract, the Johnson County contract, and the GBA contract on the deal in 2013. And those dollars were coming back to the city as part of the upfront bond issuance. What our approach is, because we've had exactly that same concern. No, I think that at least the estimate to get through the plan review process needs to be put on deposit with the city, so that we are not
I like that.
spending dollars that we don't expect to get back.
Just in case.
So I think that's a fair proposition.
They wouldn't really be initiating phase one until they have a development agreement with us, that everybody involved.
Right.
All
but
that
it'd
becomes
be
a
a lot of
development agreement.
Right.
plans would need to be looked at.
Right.
And they have submitted plans. We've had plans in-house from them for about
A couple of weeks.
a couple of weeks now, so getting that moving helps kind of keep that forward, but we are looking to protect that interest.
Is there any movement on the tax situation?
Nope.
Is there ever?
There won't be.
Well, I think that will, no, but, and I think, well, we can talk about that when the next time we discuss their kind of situation about how we're looking at making sure that that is addressed appropriately as a part of this conversation. They can't make a partial payment because the county won't accept it, so it doesn't do them any good to do that. So some other ways to maybe, if they have those funds available, take advantage of them and hold them toward some of those other ends.
He'd be able to borrow that money from Suzie after she went to the car.
That's right.
There we go.
I think
Sounds
she
like a
said
good compromise.
streets.
It sounds hard, but I have other plans for the rest of it. Take it to council.
Not considered.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right, discussion items, on-call engineering services contract, John Belger, and Laura Smith.
I'll do it.
Why would you
I'll
not
do
want
it.
that?
Not closer.
Why would you not want that?
So, on-call engineering services, back in 2014, they went through an RFP process and selected Woodson and GBA as the city's on-call engineers. That contract contemplated a 3-year term with a potential to extend for an additional 1 year. So technically that contract would expire December 31st of 2017 unless we exercise that option to renew. I know there's been some conversation over the course of the last year about whether on-call engineering services is the preferred route. From our staff perspective, we would recommend that we continue those relationships, particularly with some of the projects that we have in the mix right now, both on the stormwater side and the street side, from design and inspection. And so we would just be looking for direction to extend that for 1 additional year, and then we would be going through that RFP process again in 2018.
I recommend we extend it.
I'm not sure it requires any formal council action, but if it does, we'll bring it back next month for action.
All right, then, any other department updates, Laura?
I do have one. So Monday was a really yucky Monday because Nora Tripp, who many of you know, announced that she will be leaving us as of Friday. I know.
Nora Tripp.
Laura Tripp, who sits, she's just been with us a year and a half,
Why?
2 years. Well, she was a teacher before, she's going back to teaching. It's kind of her passion.
She's so good.
I know, it's a fantastic opportunity for her, but we're all processing the stages of grief with that. But anyway, we're having kind of a small birthday farewell celebration on Friday afternoon. I'll send an email in the morning, but if you want to stop by and just wish her well in that endeavor.
I had more compliments on her and how polite she was and helpful. And
Absolutely.
that's
So it's a fantastic. She's going to teach 5th grade in Tonganoxie, but it will be a loss. It is an absolutely a loss for us. So
that's good.
I have a question.
yes.
Do we have updates on the mission goal, what the status is?
Last time I saw Bab was in church about 2 months ago, and she said they were still in a lawsuit.
With the insurance company, right? With the insurance company.
All right, if there isn't anything else, that concludes the Community Development Committee meeting.
Do you say quick break, or you guys?
Hey, Martha, what you do, show me your north. I'll
Hey,
get you.
can you do those?
I've got one there. I'll take that, too.
Kristin wants to.
She's really good, guys. Thank you. I was so great.
So there's on that one.
Yeah, I got the hot water, and I was gonna get it there. It's okay. I don't know. Okay.
Well, look.
Everything I bring students with that. Yes. And then we might write that. Yeah. I just wasn't sure exactly who was doing it.
Right, bad idea.
Okay.
That has nothing to do with this.
They decided to give us the right.
Two people that will be here during.
And you can have an opportunity to speak.
Three that are watching Thanksgiving TV. One of them is my mom.
Yeah, I got them. I just wasn't sure.
Does she watch it? I don't like my kids, my kids watch all. Yeah, he'll text me and be like,
They can't hear you.
because I'm not talking. Speak up.
That's definitely special colors.
That is funny, see.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they do.
I don't tell anyone.
Or like sometimes when we have work sessions, she'll write, how come it's not on? And I'm like,
Foundation.
you know what, I will buy it for this time.
Engineering firm, are they doing the PC ones? 51st of May.
They raised money and it went to the holiday auction.
Well, that looked like that was one of their, it didn't say anything.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
I'll have to look and see. Maybe it is.
5100 May. They did the parking garage. So I just said that's when I go. That FS.
I'll
just look at my. No, it's on there.
Yeah, sure.
What is details?
You might tell them what the road is. But you tell them they have
Lunch with them when I called them.
big human in there. Big human. Say something, hey, I'm a little something extra. Show you for the effort. She says, good,
I'll make the blog.
which means on your deathbed, you will receive total cash. So you got that going for you.
One city plan, you want to
Same kind.
Big human in there.
on me.
No, I'm actually, I think we're waiting on ours.
Remember, we used to have to wait on the smokers. They don't smoke.
Oh, thank God, I'm not through that.
I don't know, a heater would be so bad.
Wonder? Are you cold?
No, I don't, a cigarette.
Oh.
I don't even smoke.
What's the heat?
Cigarette.
Maybe
Maybe it's maybe that's just a northern thing.
Was I smoked for 32 years? Loggers?
I've never heard that.
You want to go out there and log?
I've never heard that. What is that? Oh, a log.
John.
It's
Who's time?
Pass it out. She's brushing it.
Actually, use a
Candy.
Oh, I thought he was talking about smoking. I thought you were talking about smoking. I thought you don't smoke.
Me too. I also rely on her to read my mind.
Ready. Let's go here. All right, let's call to order the,
Listen to this.
hey,
Hey.
yeah, thank you. Harumph. Now, let's call to order the Finance and Admin Committee meeting for Wednesday, August 9th. And the first item up on the agenda is a resolution implementing the recommendations from the 2017 classification and compensation study. So,
Thank you. Last week, we talked about just kind of our recommendations for an implementation schedule. You all seem supportive of that, so we said we would turn that into an actual resolution that will memorialize that, which we've done for this packet. And so we really just took those 5 implementation steps and incorporated them into the resolution.
Any questions?
If you have any,
that would take effect starting this fall, then, right?
it would take effect essentially immediately, yes. We would start implementing with the September 22nd payroll.
So have you had good feedback? Have you had any feedback? Have you had...
We have had good feedback. I will tell you that the next round of feedback, as we talked about last week, is going to come when people start to review those individual letters about specifically how it impacts them.
Mr. Quinn, did you have a question?
I did, thank you.
He's never raised his hand.
Yeah, I think I was going to ask if the employees had been given all this information and what they thought of it. I'm pretty sure the
They have.
heads of departments are going to like it.
Right. I think that, again, I think any study, I think they have been very appreciative and I think they're very anxious and pleased to see the implementation this year and not waiting until the 2018 budget year to do that. So having the ability financially to do that, I think, has been very well received. So good steps. And as I've told them, you know, it's never going to be enough or feel like enough sometimes, but one of the things that is an important goal for us is being able to sustain this in the future. You don't want to do something so large in the first year that you can't sustain that. So we're looking at meaningful and sustainable are key for us.
So is this something that moves us to the upper 40%?
This moves us towards the 60th
So we have
percentile.
programs every year?
We will go through this process evaluation. That's one of the last steps in the implementation, is working with the Austin Peters Group to determine what that index is that we'll use each year. So what we didn't do, and so some of you didn't experience last year, is we didn't bring forward a recommendation for the salary structures because we knew that we would be kicking off this whole study. But typically in the November, December timeframe, we will come forward to the council with a recommendation for any salary range movement or adjustments, and that's something we would pick up maybe even as early as, I think, anticipating this year.
I think I speak for everyone when we say we really appreciate the staff, the job that they do, and I hope this is a good first step in keeping some people happy and for keeping them around. And I personally would like to see this ongoing every however many years, not 7 or 10 years in between the next time we really take a good hard look at it. I think it's important to stay some of the competitors. Glad we did this.
And I see we're working with the Austin Peters Group to give us a conclusion of compensation. kind of a review on this. Okay, so can we get somebody that's more peppy and explains it better than I do?
Oh, Gibbs, you'll probably get the review from us. We will work with them on that index, and you'll hear from us.
I need somebody peppier than Laura.
I think Brian just got
I need somebody happier than the one that we have.
You heard
Well,
that.
but
You heard
it
it.
packs us up and tells us this is what we're doing, this is a really good deal, and blah, blah, blah. You
Yes.
know, kind of a cheerleader for us. I mean,
Yeah. So the last thing you want to see is one of your council people dozing off.
exactly. I just don't like ladies in long dresses.
May I say, I'm going to recommend we take this.
Consent on this one, or?
No, I'd actually like to talk
talk
about
about
this.
it.
Okay.
I think it's a great idea.
It's on the agenda. Great. Next up on the list, we've got the 2018 budget resolution.
Again, we looked at a draft last week. We didn't make any changes, so this just takes your 2018 budget resolution to its final form and communicates our tax and fee policies and sort of program objectives publicly for the 2018 budget.
I'd like to recommend we take item number 2 and number 3 to council.
Yeah, and item number 3 is pretty closely aligned with that, with the 2018 through 2022 CIP. So I'm fine with that. I think the budget probably should go on consent.
That's what I
No.
did.
I don't think number 3 should be.
Okay. All right, so number 4 is the annual budget adoption.
Yes, and this is just a reminder that we will actually look for and prepare separate motions to adopt each budget separately as a part of this process, because technically the Rock Creek Drainage Districts 1 and 2 are separate taxing entities, so we can't adopt them all together as one group.
And I think this should not be on consent.
No, I think we should take it to council. Cool. Those are all the action items we had.
It's fast.
We do have some discussion on the EPC project and the Senate request from EPC on the Mission Trail development, and I think Bruce has some updates for us, or Laura?
Bruce is, no, I will turn it over to Bruce, and I would introduce you to Terry O'Leary, who is another partner with EPC Development. I don't think you've had the opportunity to meet him. I think Steve Kuhn has been at most of our other meetings, but Terry has been involved with us at the staff level and is here this evening.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Bruce.
How was it last Wednesday night with the windows open and then it's open?
It was nice.
Oh, yeah.
So I would like to give you a little bit of background on, again, the project. We covered some of this back on July 19th, I believe. Talk a little bit about the analysis that we've done on the numbers for the project, and then sort of broaden perspective to some of the other considerations that you might think about in gauging whether and how you want to participate in this project financially. Finally, move on to some possible areas of compromise so we get to a win-win with EPC and the city and see what observations you have. Really what we're looking for here is to get the committee's feedback, your questions, your ideas, and direction for city staff and your advisors so that we know how you'd like us to move on your behalf in further discussions with EPC and hopefully getting to a good development agreement for consideration in September. So with that, I won't go through this in detail, but it's my understanding that the EPC has submitted final plans for the project to the city. 200 units of apartments, about 300 structured parking spaces with somewhere between 50 or 60 of those spaces on the first level available for public parking. You're familiar with the proposed retail, ideally a restaurant use with an outdoor courtyard as well facing Johnson Drive. They'd like to acquire the site this fall, start construction this spring, coming spring, and then complete the project late 2019 so that all of 2020 would be their first full lease-up year and be off to the races at that point in time. So you're aware they've asked for 100% of the property TIF that would be generated by the project over a 20-year period. If you approve the TIF project plan, that clock would essentially start this fall, and so it would run potentially for 20 years through the fall of 2037. We call it fiscal 37, which really ends with the property tax collection. That would be in the spring of that year. But they are looking at pay-as-you-go reimbursement of TIF on terms to be determined in the development agreement. They're also asking for a sales tax exemption through the issuance of IRBs. That would be a private transaction between the city and the development group. But we're estimating that the sales tax exemption would have a value of between $1 million and $1.3 million, depending on final project budgets. So that's the request of the city in terms of financial participation. Again, we covered some of these drivers, but just to recap, why are they asking for this assistance? Well, there is the cost of acquiring this site. It is not an inexpensive site as an already developed site on Johnson Drive. There is the cost of structured parking. 300 units of parking is not inexpensive to complete on this site. And then probably one of the bigger factors also is the rates that they would have to charge in order to have a project that is not in need of TIF or IRB assistance compared to what's really deemed reasonable in this market as sort of a first of its kind type of project. And there's a gap between what would be needed to be a fully free market project versus what is deemed feasible in this market. And that's one of the key drivers as well for the cash flow assistance that would come from the TIF. So in looking at their proposal, we looked at many, many different aspects. We really delved into their development budget, the hard and soft costs there. For the most part, we thought the estimates in their development budget made sense and were in line with what we see with similar projects. We asked questions about their project funding plan, the debt, the equity funding, and the likely terms of that seemed to make sense. Asked for detail on the lease rates, both for the apartments as well as the retail space, and the revenues that would be generated from those rental rates. And then also looked at operating expenses. And really, we didn't have any big areas where we thought they had missed the mark or where we had significant questions. We did note that there needed to be an offset or an accommodation for the sales tax exemption in reducing the net project price a little bit from roughly 41 million down to about 40 million. But in the grand scheme of things, we thought that their budgets and performance penciled out. So using that information, we built our own performa, our own budget model, and then forecast a number of different levels of participation to look at rates of return, both cash-on-cash return and internal rates of return, to really have a couple different ways of looking at what their prospective return on investment would be. And at the end of the day, when we sort of looked at these different scenarios, we determined that looking at both cash-on-cash as well as internal rate of return, purely from a fiscal perspective, we thought that it would be reasonable to land at about a 15-year TIF term. So it's a maximum of 20 years, and we thought that a 15-year term would be a reasonable level of risk mitigation and helping the developer fill that gap and get to a reasonable rate of return. So that was essentially where we landed on the fiscal analysis, and I know that you've seen some of those details as well. So that said, that's not the only part of the story, right? There are other benefits to the city that we believe are important to factor into the equation as well. And those would be the revitalization and reuse of this vacant or dormant parcel in downtown Mission, more downtown residents, and the economic activity that they would bring. We know that the public parking has a value. It would be virtually impossible for you to develop this public parking on this site, but just looking at the pure hard cost involved of developing 60 parking spaces, that's a value of about $870,000 in the developer's performa that is going to those public parking spaces. Also, if this development does go forward, there will be city revenues that would not be captured or part of the city incentives. So you're looking at development fees, We're looking at the sales taxes that would be generated from that retail space or restaurant space on the first floor. Franchise fees on the utilities that both that retail space and the residents of the apartments would generate as well. So there are some meaningful factors in addition to the TIF that you are, quote, giving up as part of this deal. I know that Laura and Brian also did some research on whether and how there might be some additional city expenses. And we think that really for the uses that are contemplated here, the additional expense to the city is probably going to be pretty nominal in terms of public safety, public works, administration. For the most part, when you look at this project at least, you've got the staff capacity and resources in place to handle calls for service or other demands that this project might put on city services. So could there be some additional cost? Yes, of course. But is it a meaningful or really quantifiable increase for this development? We weren't able to really say, yes, it's going to increase by X thousands of dollars. So when you really look at these somewhat qualitative factors, these factors might, in addition to our financial analysis, lead you to say, we do think that this rises to the level of a higher level of participation perhaps than you otherwise would consider giving. Or vice versa, you might disagree and think that there isn't as much need for incentives for this project. Any questions about that before we move on? Another thing I wanted to focus on a little bit more than what I had previously is the question of the new city taxes that would be generated. You know that with this TIF deal, if you approve the TIF, and even if you went the full 20 years, you know that in year 21, the taxes would go on the general tax, or the tax value would go on the general tax rolls, and the city would start to capture property tax from that. But let's assume for the moment that you did do a 15-year TIF, that the developer agreed to that, and that therefore you started capturing taxes earlier, right, in year 16 instead of year 21. Well, what is that tax really worth? Well, we calculated using the same values that we used for the TIF analysis. We calculated what the city's taxes would be. And if you assume a 2% annual average inflation value from year 1 to year 16, and the city's current 18 mil tax rate, the total incremental new taxes from this development are estimated at about $512,000. And that's a total for 5 years in fiscal 33 through 37. So that's a lot of money, and it's about $100,000 per year, as you can tell. But if you look at what is that worth to the city in today's dollars, it's substantially less. It's about $200,000 less, or about $319,000, just using a very simple 3% discount rate. If you use a higher discount rate, let's say 4%, it's worth about $270,000. So that net value in today's dollars goes down the higher the interest rate you use to get to a current value. That's still a lot of money, but what we wanted to just note for your consideration is that there are a number of factors that could change that value further when you look at what that could be worth to the city in years 16 through 20. The developer and we have also made certain assumptions as to how this property will be appraised when it comes online in the year 2020. Johnson County could either start off with a higher or a lower value that would significantly change the trajectory of those future property taxes. In addition, while historically in the county you've seen pretty steady appreciation of values, that's not a sure thing, right? We saw with the Great Recession, property values in some cases, in a lot of cases, went down, and we could have similar volatility in the future. So there's a pretty big asterisk next to those future tax dollars when you think about how property values could change both upfront and over time. In addition, you've got the tax lid now in place, and that could have a couple of different effects. One is, right now with the tax lid, new value from new development is exempt from the formula. So you can add that new value, and then it becomes part of the formula after that. That might change, and we just don't know whether and how the state legislature would change how they would treat U value. In addition, if you have increases in property values that sort of exceed the tax lid caps, what that's going to mean is that your mill rate is going to be forced down over time because you have to get to the right amount of tax levy, right? So the tax lid isn't going to restrict your tax value, but it is going to restrict your tax levy. So if your tax value is going up too high from inflation, your mill rate might be lower than the 18 mills that we use to estimate the taxes. So I don't want to belabor this too much, but you know, when we estimate these taxes 15 years out, there's just a lot of caveats that is worth considering and thinking about how much real value is this to the city, and could you see a room for compromise with the developer to get this project, knowing that the taxes might be somewhat different and potentially less than what's estimated here. So, in conclusion, we would recommend consideration of not only the 15-year term that was indicated by the analysis that we did, but also the benefits from this project and how they likely are going to outweigh the cost to the city, both the qualitative benefits as well as other revenue sources to the city. The fact that you are looking at meaningful new taxes, and that shouldn't be just written off, but it's uncertain, and there's a number of factors that could lead to potentially a lower tax value coming back to the city, either in year 16 or at a later point, potentially up to year 21. You also have the question of would EPC agree to do this project with a lower TIF term. As you know, they're feeling pretty strongly about the need for 20 years. We think that there might be some room for compromise and for a win-win, but it's likely, based on what they've told to us and for the reasons that they've represented to us, that they would not be willing to go forward with a 15-year term. So that's a factor. So what are some of the potential win-wins that you could look at for the city and the developer? Well, you might say, you know what, all of these other benefits to the city outweigh our concerns about shutting down the TIF district as soon as possible, and so we're willing to do a 20-year term. You could very well make that decision for this project. What you might do as an add-on in order to have a little bit of risk mitigation from the city's perspective is a look-back test. And this is where you would look at certain parameters in their estimates, development costs, financing costs, the lease rates, the other components of the operating pro forma, and agree with the developer that you'll look back maybe in year 2021 or 2022 to see how is the project actually done. And if it's done better than estimated, then there would be a mechanism for lessening the TIF term. So that way the developer could say, yes, we're getting the 20 years, but you have the ability to say, but if you do better than projected, we've got a way of cranking that back a little bit. Another option would be to split the difference somewhere between 15 and 20 years. Maybe with a look back, maybe not, maybe with a higher dollar cap so that the developer knows that either they get, let's say, 17 years up to either 17 years or $8 million, whichever comes first, but whenever one of those gets met, the TIF stops, and that's a pretty common mechanism as well. Or a third option, and this is something that really hasn't been discussed in any detail, but is kind of intriguing, is perhaps a 20-year TIF term where EPC agrees to either fund some improvements up front that benefit the city, or agrees to do some revenue sharing during the first few years of its operations that the city could then use to fund city improvements as well. Again, we don't have a lot of details on this, but it sounds like that might be a way for the city to get some upfront benefit, maybe some practical value in funding some improvements that you don't otherwise have a designated funding source for, but then the developer, in exchange for doing that, has the certainty of that longer TIF term. And certainly from a time value of money perspective, if it makes sense to do something like this third option, I could show how, having the developer either share cash flow or fund improvements in the near term could be worth more than having those taxes in years 15, 16, and so on. So more to come on that, but that's a potential area of compromise that could really be a win for the city and still, again, allow the developer the confidence to move forward. Any questions about those potential win-wins?
Yeah, I don't know if it's about the potential win-win, but the lower, higher appraised value, the lower, higher annual inflation rates, the tax lid, all these little caveats that you threw in there, is that any different than it would have been 10 years ago for a development, or 20 years ago?
Well, not in terms of appraised value and inflation and trying to predict where.
I mean, don't you always?
There's always uncertainty there, but the tax lid really is a new area of uncertainty. I mean, the state legislature has already changed the tax lid at least once, I think, from when it was first established. Actually, it's made a number of changes to it, and we just don't know how it's going to work long term in terms of forcing city tax rates down. How much our property value is going to increase over and above this inflation rate limited cap on the levy, right? And how much reduction in mill rates our city is going to have to do to meet that. So you're right, Pat, in terms of the values and how those values will grow or decrease, you're right. There's always been that uncertainty, but the tax lid is a new element.
Makes sense.
Great job, Bruce. Really, we appreciate you bringing that overview. That
Thanks.
it cuts it out real easily. Thank you.
The last thing I would just point out is that now that we are trying to figure out how to get to a win-win with the developer, and again, I do think there's some areas for opportunity there. We're here today really talking about that by-for evaluation that we did, as well as some options to get to a good solution. We're hoping to work all of that out with the developer over the next couple of weeks, be in position for Finance and Admin on September 6th, come to you with a really pretty well fleshed out development agreement for your questions, feedback. There's still the opportunity to do some additional fine-tuning after that point, but then to come to you at Council on September 20th for a final development agreement, and then 2 action items, which would be approval of a TIF ordinance, which would also include the development agreement, as well as this IRB resolution of intent. So, queuing that up there. Finally, I guess again, we're really looking for your feedback, your questions on the negotiations we've had, the analysis that we've done, any other thoughts you have on the value of the project to the city, and then direction that you would have for staff and for us as your advisors in working with EPC to try to get to a solution.
We're not negotiating anything.
No.
Can I ask a question of Mr. O'Leary?
Absolutely.
So, want to take the stage?
Sure. Take the stand.
Is there a stand?
Take the stand. Raise your right hand.
Okay. I'll raise both hands.
So you've been a commercial broker for decades, haven't you?
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
And some of us are neophytes in this. I mean, we don't know. I mean, I don't know. This is like an incredible amount of stuff to absorb for me to make a decision. And we depend upon Bruce for a lot of it. So are you two getting along now, or?
Well, we've always got along.
Okay, good. Are you encouraged at all about this whole development after you met with Bill this morning and hearing what Bruce says today? I mean, that's just your gut feeling?
I'm encouraged. I've been encouraged the entire process. And what we would prefer, as we have done on most developments, to have no incentives. it's better for us, it's better for financing, it's better for the markets, it's better for the investors, it's because then there's no games as to valuation. And you asked a question about what can, this is oversimplified as Bruce has done, but there's a lot of things that can happen with the taxes, for example. I mean, the assessors in Johnson County have been chasing apartments and other commercial developments because of the cap rates are so low, which is a mechanism to value income. So if a percentage, if the market says I'll take 5% for your money, I'll buy your money at a 5% rate, but that could, so your property's worth $10 million. Well, if that changes to 8%, your property's worth $6 million. So we're in over, just like we're overvalued, I think, in the stock market at 22,000, it keeps going up. There's a lot of apartments that are overvalued right now. So one thing that could happen, even if the market's still good, is cap rates could go, because these projects, once they're built and stabilized, they're valued on income. The market right now is chasing sales. So if the income is 100,000 and the demand in the market is 8% on that money versus 5, then that value goes way down. And so that affects us and the future values of the income streams to the city, whether you have incentives or not. So there's a lot of volatility in the market right now. The banks are pulling back. And one thing that we're concerned about is that even if we got the incentives, we have our investor ready to go, we have financing very close, but there are rates changing in the market. We have certain variables plugged in our analysis that if everything goes fine, then this works. But if construction costs, since we did our first one of these types of projects in 2010, there was $70 a foot. They're $115 today for the same building. So we could afford to build the first building over in Mission Farms, which I think some of you saw back then, because that was reasonable, but that isn't reasonable today. And we can't charge $2 a foot per square foot versus $1.50 or $60. You know, in any market, we're asking $1.50 a foot up at 80th and Metcalf. Comparable area. I actually think this is better, but comparable. They're getting $1.40 a foot because of competition in the market over at Mission Farms. When 2 years ago, it was $1.52 a foot. So that mark has actually gone backwards based on the competition. So everybody's looking at all that, and however, we believe that if you get the best locations for whether it's walkability or drive time or whatever, then that, and with our track record of management and quality of construction, that will outweigh some of these other market pressures. So we're hoping that, you know, if something, you know, globally doesn't happen in the next 30 or 60 days that changes banks from pulling back, whether it's a missile crisis, I mean, those little things can shake things up. So assuming everything goes well with the incentives and so on, then we're very optimistic that all this is going to fall into place. But it is different today than it was a year ago and even 2 years ago for a lot of factors. So we're kind of on the fence right now. I would say that the only area in Kansas City that probably can get away without incentives for apartments is the Plaza. And it's starting to get overbuilt. There's like 4 or 5 projects that have been approved recently. So that's going to stop development down there for a while. So anyway, but this for what we've put together and designed and for what's on the table today works. But even if it gets passed, in 30 days, if the markets change, whether it's financing or construction costs move too much, then that changes things for us. And so we have to, even though there's, these numbers are what we hope we get, we have to build in risk mitigation on our side. So what if we don't get $1.60 rents? What if they're $1.40 rents? What if construction costs go up, you know, a couple million before we start? What if a subcontractor goes broke and that costs us $500,000? You know, there's a lot of things that can happen. So when we go to the market and ask for money, we have to answer all of those questions. And unless we can build in enough variance and variables on our side, and that's why the unpredictability of even if we got the incentives, if a city wants to put in clawbacks or but-for tests down the road, that adds more uncertainty to the banks and the financing. So, well, what if you did or do better? Or what if you do worse? Do we get more incentives? You know. So, well, what if you did a little better? So you only get 19 years. Well, can we have 22 if we do worse? Well, the answer is no. So there's that's why there's not a lot of people that do what we do, but we love it and we're good at it, and we pick locations that are fabulous like this. So I'm optimistic that all this is going to work out. I think we've come up with a couple of things that will benefit the city now versus sooner than 20 years from now. So I'm optimistic about that. But I think I've always got along with everybody here, so is Steve, so I don't think anything different.
Mr. Larry, forgive me, I didn't read your bio, so could you just tell me a little
There's not much on it.
Your background, where you're from, that kind of stuff?
I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. Went to the University of Missouri. Sorry about that. KU people. But that's kind of been written off in this area, so it's all pretty much all KU now anyway. Came back here, got married, had 5 kids, moved to Kansas in 1985, I think, something like that. So I've been over here for a while. Started in 1980 with the Zimmer Group companies selling and leasing in warehouses, industrial properties. Built a few of those. And I left there in 2000 with, Steve came with me a year later, and we started doing apartments and industrial buildings, but we're mainly doing all apartments now. So Steve came from as a construction management, project management background. As he moved up through the real estate business, I've come from a marketing and a design background, so we kind of married those 2 skill sets. And now we have 3 other people in our office doing what Steve and I do between 28 and 33. So that's very nice to get a little pressure off of us.
So you personally get pretty involved in the design phase of it?
Oh, down to the color of the light switches.
That's really cool in your projects.
No, what my passion is, we're getting ready to open up Avenue 80, and I'm walking around looking at, everything, and before, during, and after, and walking through with photographers taking pictures and going through the branding, and it's just, and I get labeled as picking the colors, and I get dumbed down to the color guy, but then if they aren't picked right, then people go in and say, well, who picked these colors? And it's like, but I've fortunately been okay so far. Yeah, Steve and I and our design team, we come up with conceptual designs and based on studies from in other markets or what we've done in art. There's a lot of developers that turn their projects over to the architect and say, have a good time, we're going to go away and do something else, and we don't do that. We're down to every detail on the buildings, and so we like doing that.
So you guys have folks that manage most of your properties right now, or?
Well, we have we have a management, our philosophy is that we want to tie marketing and leasing with the development side, because we think obviously if you build them, you can't lease them. So we don't want to spend the same amount of time managing a third-party company. We'd rather just do it ourselves. We actually started out in actually early 2000s with a third-party manager, and we spent more time asking them what they were doing and why they were doing it. We just said, we're just going to do it ourselves.
So I saw in one of the memos that there was a mention that there's a strong possibility you guys might be looking to sell the property after 2 years of stabilization, I believe.
Any property on the market's always for sale. So if we build all the properties as a core asset to keep for 20 years, but if or longer, if the market to the investment group, and we don't control the investment group, says somebody offered us X dollars and we can't afford not to sell it. That's true with houses, it's true with office buildings, true with. So there has been in the apartment market, there's been a larger spread lately because of the demand for that type of asset for just the real estate class. We would prefer to keep the assets. The first 4 we built, the investor group kept 2, sold 2. We haven't sold any of the other ones yet, but they're always, you're always getting offers. They're always on the market. But like Bruce said, I mean, they could go down in value, and you have to hold it another 5 years because you had to recover. So it's up and down.
So the details that support whatever agreement we come to, is it with the property or the builder?
Well, the same group that owns the building signs the development agreement. So it's with the entity that owns the real estate. It's not with our construction, our development company. So we're forming an...
I think I know. So there's typically an assignment clause where you're forming a development agreement with EPC Real Estate Group as the developer, but as we typically have worded it, says, you know, they have to inform the city if they're selling to another entity. You get a chance to review that new entity, but it typically says the transfer of the TIF benefits won't be unreasonably withheld. So if there's something that really doesn't seem right, you have the ability to say, we're not comfortable with this, and really get more information. But as long as it's a reputable firm that is looking to buy the asset, you would typically transfer whatever remaining life there is to the new group.
Thank you.
Maybe one personal question, you don't have to answer this. Quinn, Garrity, guilty Irish Catholics. O'Leary, that a guilty Irish Catholic man?
So far.
Okay.
Yeah.
You Rikers boy?
My kids went there. I went to Southwest back in the day. I had 2 brothers that went to Rikers, but somebody had to stay home. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, so committee, we're just really looking again for any other questions or feedback. You know, if you're not interested in working towards a compromise, we also need to know that. We're getting the sense that, you know, this is an important project to the city. You'd like to see a solution that makes the project work for the reasons that Terry elaborated on, but that also protects the city's interest. And we know you have a lot of interest in setting good practices and good precedents, right, in terms of the city's use of incentives, so that it's really clear for future projects also how you approach these types of deliberations and negotiations. And so that's really also what I was trying to get at with the last bullet. You know, there's some things that might appeal to you on the value, the monetary value of whatever is structured to benefit the city. There might be something that has sort of practical value. That might be some of those improvements that we might negotiate that could get done earlier than later, and especially if the city doesn't have a funding source. I already identified that could really be a great practical win for the city. And then again, precedent. What appeals to you in terms of something that you can explain to your constituents, that also makes you feel like you have a good position going into discussions with other developers. But this is kind of the opportunity for you to give guidance, as well as, of course, talking directly with Laura, Brian, myself. But any observations that you want to share?
Are you going to enlighten us any about the conversations you had today, or is that another meeting?
Well, I think we had a good conversation today, and just kind of thinking about some areas where we might be able to brainstorm together. And Terry and Steve will be back next Wednesday when Bruce is back in town to sit down, and we'll actually start kind of plowing through some of those details. And then those will come back to you, absolutely.
Okay.
So Bruce, in any similar projects that you work through any of these potential win-wins where some other element can be funded as a part of the development agreement, just maybe what some examples of those might be? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there's often public infrastructure that's required for a development, and there's usually a pretty direct connection, and so there's a question of, okay, is the developer going to pay for something that is necessary or really would be appropriate for the development, or will the city pay for that? And so that is actually part of the discussion on a lot of projects. I think this is a little unique in that hasn't really been on our radar screen, but as we've been thinking about how do we overcome this disagreement on TIF duration, it seems like there might be some opportunity here for the city to get some benefit up front or in the near term, and for, again, the developer to have that long-term certainty that they're looking for. So that, yeah, long story short, that is definitely something that we've seen before.
And just no, I mean, without getting too specific, any, in the last few years, any examples of something that you've seen that was...
Streets, sidewalks, lighting, decorative features, off-street parking areas, either existing parking areas or new parking areas, wayfinding, signage, and things that make it easier for not only people that are part of this development, but other people in a downtown area to get around and find what they're looking for. Those are all elements that don't always have a really clear city funding source. So if we can build them into a project, pedestrian crossings are another one. You know, things that really add to livability and safety and visibility, but sometimes are lesser priorities on city capital plans. Does that make sense?
Good job.
Well, thanks very much.
We'll see you again next
Yes.
week, right?
Yeah.
This,
If
I
we
know.
got questions, we can call you.
Yeah. Or Brian. Yeah.
I know Councilmember Crane had asked for kind of a table that identified, the one that's not on here is Mission Square because they do not fall into that apartment category. There's an ownership and buy-in element there. So they're missing from this list. But this just really goes through, and so as you look at this, and there's additional information, we tried to look at the property, the address, the number of units, kind of the unit types that they had available and the range of rents that were being charged on that. Now, this doesn't account for the deals that might be given. These are strictly coming probably from internet sites there. The type of amenities that are available, the year of original construction. So you'll see that after the Wellstone project,
30, 40, 50
yes,
problems.
which is why we also then wanted to look at and kind of just categorize some of the major renovations that had happened at those properties over time. So I think you are seeing investments and reinvestments in the apartments in our community, looking at the appraised values from 16 and 17, and without exception, every one of those properties increased in value, at least in this most recent transition from tax shares. And I think it also shows you that we're talking about a final appraised value here for the EPC project that is significantly higher than any of the other existing projects that we have. So if there's other things. We tried to capture maybe occupancy or vacancy rates, and that wasn't something that we could readily access.
Well, Kristin pointed out, did you notice the first one has a dog park?
One of them does have a small dog park.
Dog park. Dog park.
I mean, the old apartment complex that we used to live at had a small dog park for residents too. I think that was the plan, if I remember right, for this one at UPC as well. But this was, it was mainly just for the residents. It was actually one of the ways that I know a lot of neighbors. It was used a lot, so.
We don't know about that.
What, the one here? Well, it's a private one, it's part of that complex.
Thank you.
But there is
You're
this-
welcome. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Okay, good.
I think, I mean, just looking at these two, I think it's important to call it, what we've been presented so far is going to be a little bit different level than a lot of the existing apartments, doing amenities and some of the other things. But just even in unit washer and dryer, I know when I looked at moving to an apartment in Michigan before I had to find a house, there was, I think, one complex that even offered that. Those are some of those things that in other areas you find are consistently available. We just don't have a lot of those nice things here. So I think there's a market need for a higher level.
That's all we have this evening. So next week, you will have your public hearing on the TIF project plan and the CID for the gateway at your city council meeting. And then we will have a work session on the gateway on the 23rd, kind of the, Bruce is tired of seeing all of us.
I like these meetings.
Yeah,
There's more here.
Proteins are healthy.
Don't act like you're over here in the water.
Sorry.